Well, certainly the big deal of the day, probably the month, highlighting the changing face of Wall Street. Morgan Stanley going after the retail investor with a $13 billion buyout of E-Trade. But Morgan's not alone in those efforts. Goldman Sachs has been investing in what they call Marcus, its online consumer banking platform, for years. And just yesterday, UBS selected the head of digital banking giant ING as its new CEO. Now, Morgan Stanley finishing the day lower, while E-Trade, of course, saw a big pop. Karen, your take on the deal news today.
Well, it's not surprising that E-Trade did a deal with somebody, right? I mean, the writing was on the wall once we saw rates go to zero, and then we saw Schwab do TD Ameritrade. So that's not surprising. It's a little, but not a huge surprise that it was Morgan Stanley. It's not quite their customer, right? I guess they want to expand their customer base. They want to expand their deposit, their funding base. So I get that. I see how they could cut expenses. I mean, it's sort of a big price, but it's not crazy. And I think you got to give Goldman the benefit of the doubt, right? I think the evolution of the business has been a good one. It's been successful. And so
it's a race for assets, isn't it? You just got to...
You got right. And I'm sort of surprised. I mean, Goldman, I assume, did look at it, maybe did bid. I don't know. Maybe that customer isn't quite right for them either. But I think Goldman gets a chance to see if this works.
The stickiness of the assets is critical. The access to consumer finance and consumer lending, the interesting thing is it actually kind of gets them more into a commercial banking realm. If you think about after the crisis, when actually Goldman and Morgan Stanley, essentially used some of those banking licenses to just get funding, but it was never really their core business. Morgan Stanley went on to make essentially wealth management the cornerstone of their business. And I think it's been proven smart. I think they've clearly moved to the front of the class. I think they were at the front of the class before this deal. I think this deal is helpful. I think the price they paid, if you think about where E-Trade was before you started to see the consolidation, and it looked like they might be edged out by the Ameritrade Schwab deal, this was a $60, $70 stock. So if you look at the average over the last 6 months, this is probably in line where this thing should have traded, even though it looked like a huge premium today.
And we've mentioned this quickly, Brian, but go back and look at what the previous all-time high was in the stock, Morgan Stanley. It happened sometime in March 2018, around 59 bucks. And then go back and look at where it just topped out, and we've discussed this. In terms of technicians out there, Carter Braxton Worth being one of them, he will point out a major double top here. Couple that with the fact that book value in Morgan Stanley's probably, I don't know, 46.5 or so. It's not ridiculous to think that we're not going to go back and revisit book value at some point in the stock.